Welcome to Side by Side Australasia with Jezza and Gazza. On what I'm looking at here, Jezza, you've got a photo there of what seems like a concrete statues of the so-called Chinese authoritarianism.
That's exactly what it is, Gazza.
Is it? Or
Yes.
is it something more to that photo?
Of course there is. Yeah, people have their mindset in concrete about what China is. And I think what I'm going to do today, or what we're going to do today, I've got some photographs to show you, and each photograph has a little story. What I would like to do is I want to go back in history to 2 years ago when nobody knew who the hell I was. I was just a guy living in China. I just retired from full-time work. But I had done a bike ride from the border of Macau to the border of Kazakhstan. This is basically traveling north and northwest across China. And it's a 4,900 kilometer journey. And it was something that was a bit of a challenge, of course, something that was difficult to do. But there aren't that many people who've done something like that. And it made me not unique by a long, long way. There are plenty of people. There's a lot of Chinese people on the road that you see riding bikes. But in terms of Western people living in China, there aren't that many of us. So it makes it quite interesting. And about 18 months, 2 years ago almost, I started twittering about these bike rides. I've also done a bike ride from Harbin in the far north, what's known as Dongbei, and all the way down to Guangdong, where I live. I've done another bike ride where I spent 7 weeks traveling around Guangdong and Guangxi, just kind of a holiday. And a couple of years ago, in fact, this time 2 years ago, before COVID, my wife and I were just finishing a bike ride from Urumqi. We flew into Xinjiang and we rode out of Xinjiang back across to. We live near the border of Macau, so if anyone understands the geography and knows where Urumqi is, you know that's a fairly big ride. And it was kind of not quite a replication, a reverse journey of my first ride in 2014, riding from the border of Macau to the border of Kazakhstan. We covered some of the same area, but flying into Urumqi and then riding back was a slightly different route. But we have spent a lot of time in Xinjiang. And Xinjiang is a very topical thing. I happen to live near Hong Kong, also a topical thing. And what happened about going back more than a year, I got a contact from Global Times asking me if I'd be interested in an interview. Would they allow me to be interviewed about my bike ride? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. And, get people out there. Global Times is a big thing. It's the English language newspaper. It's all around the world. It really is truly a global newspaper. And they wanted to interview me. So I thought this was great. And the first thing they started talking about was Xinjiang. And it was all Xinjiang this, Xinjiang that. They weren't interested in the bike ride at all. The fact that part of the bike ride was in Xinjiang was what really interested them. And they wanted my take on, what did I see there? What did I experience there? And I mean, the bottom line there was that it got very political. And that took my life into a political direction. From there, I got a couple of interviews with Western media who said, one of them was a Sydney newspaper in Australia who contacted me and said, did they represent you accurately? And I said, well, yeah, they did. I mean, I would have written it slightly differently, but yeah, fundamentally it was accurate. And they said, thank you. That's the end of the interview. That's all they needed to know. They weren't interested in my take. They weren't interested in my experiences, nor were they interested in me as a person. They were just interested in getting the Global Times story debunked, which I couldn't do for them. So that story fell on stony ground. And since then, almost every... You can ask a question?
Yep, I've got a question.
Yeah, go on.
You said that point about you as a person.
Yeah.
Very good point. Because what we're doing here today is that the journey that you took, we're showing Chinese people as people.
That's what I want to do. Yeah,
and that is
I want to move away from the political side of it. Just yesterday, I blocked a guy who said that he'd be happy if all chinks were wiped off the face of the earth. That's his statement. It got reported to Twitter, and he's been blocked from my Twitter feed. But that's a fact. That's what he said. He didn't spell it chinks. He spelled it chings, Chings. Now, that is a person who has no idea that he's dealing with 1.4 billion people. This is 1.4 billion people, and he would like them wiped off the face of the earth. Now, I don't even know what country he comes from. Perhaps he's even Chinese. I don't know. But it was a rude, abusive. What it means is, and this is why this first picture that I'm showing is concrete. These two policemen are made of concrete. They're painted up. They're there for the duration. They're there for a very long time. And what they do is, this is showing that, I want to show that people in China are human. They have a sense of humor. They have they laugh at this kind of thing. And this is the police they're laughing at. But here's the most important thing. This is the police laughing at themselves. This is the border. I don't know if you haven't seen these pictures before, have you? This is the first time for you. This picture is the border of Jiangxi and Guangdong. The two areas that were in a very hilly area, very mountainous area. The mountains are not that high. They're about 800 or 900 meters high. The roads are very steep, very difficult to ride. And we came to the top of this crest. And just before you go down the hill, which of course a lot of people will be speeding up and accelerating, the first thing you see is two policemen. And if you're traveling at 60, 70 kilometers an hour and just about to speed up to 100, they do look kind of real. And I think it's the police are just sniggering to themselves about how they do this. But you spot these kinds of things all over China. And that was the point that I wanted to make. Let's move away from the political situation where China is some kind of threat to some people and start thinking about the people of China. And that's what I wanted to do now. And I think what we can do through this program, through this channel, is we can introduce the Chinese people to those people around the world, hopefully, who watch you, and then say, well, these are real people. And 99.99 recurring percent of Chinese people are very, very nice people. It's a wonderful place to live. They're very accommodating, very friendly. Yeah, you can say I've got white privilege because I'm different when I live here, but I've been here a long time and they're still wonderful. They're still friendly. I've lived in the same suburb effectively for 17 years. People know me. They don't have to act up and behave nicely around me. They know I live here. They know who I am. I've been on Zhongshan television. I've been in Zhongshan radio, and people know. So effectively what I want to do is introduce, through my travels, I actually wrote a book, unpublished, called Two Journeys. That's the working title of it. And it was based on my bike ride in 2014, where we did a journey across the country. There's a lot of stories about that journey. Of course, you don't travel for a little over 2 months. But the book was based on that journey, using it as a kind of a backbone to talk about life in China. And life in China is a journey. It's a learning program. It's a completely different world here to the other worlds that I came from. I grew up in the UK. I lived 18 years in Australia, and I'm now in my 18th year in China. So you could say that I have a broad experience of Australia, UK, and China. Yeah, this is very different.
Can I go on a point you just raised earlier? Because I'm picking up on points you're saying, is that you're talking that issue, you said, white privilege. Well, I'll reflect on my experience to you was when I was living in Macau and I was in China a lot, in southern China, is people would also engage you as a different person to learn something from, because they're curious. It's a natural thing of any person. And that was a good thing. That was a great thing, because they want to learn about your culture and who you are. Now, reverse that to Australia, where more people could reach out to Chinese people in their own community and learn something different and new about their country. And and not every Chinese person is the same in their view or their outlook on things.
No.
But one thing for sure is, through my whole experience, and probably yours as well, most people in China are happy with their life there.
Oh, yeah. Well, why wouldn't you be happy? I mean, when you think about your life, what are you looking for? You're looking for a situation where you have a roof over your head. Most people in China have that. Homelessness in China is almost non-existent, despite the fact that there's a story on the internet going around about homelessness being a serious problem. there are migrant workers in China who have a home, but they choose to live quite rough. They choose to live in tents or on construction sites or by the side of the road because they don't have to pay rent, or they don't have to pay for the expenses of living somewhere, and they can send more money home, and it shortens their migrant working period. Now, I have spoken to some of these, and they all say, yeah, we could live in the dormitory, but the boss wants to charge us 100 RMB a week for that. So why should I live in the dormitory when it's free to live here? So that's a fact. I mean, there's no homelessness. People are secure. The next thing is, do we have enough money? Do we have more money than our outgoings? And generally speaking, most people do. China, I saw a really interesting statistic. It's probably not correct now. It was several years ago, where Chinese people saved 47% of their income. That's American correct. People spend 112% of their income. Now, those numbers are probably not right, and they definitely wouldn't be correct now. But that was an interesting analogy where Americans spend more than they earn, and the Chinese people save more than, well, not more than they earn, but they save a high percentage, nearly half of their income. And I find this true of most people. They live, somebody once described it to me as they live on vapor. They don't actually seem to spend a lot of money, and they're saving it, and they're saving it for a very good reason. The young people are going to get married. The older people have got kids that they want to educate, and the older people are looking forward to their retirement. So they're always saving for something. And then there's the issue of health, which, sorry, 1 second, when I'll finish this, and then we'll come back to you. Health is the other third factor. A roof over your head, enough income to provide for yourself, and health. And the Chinese health system is ever increasing, ever improving. And so possibly these things that people have about China being poor, wrong, not anymore. There are still poor people, don't get me wrong, but everybody has a home they can go to. Everybody who is in work has income and health and pension and all of these things that didn't used to exist. And people seem to think, when they think about China, they're thinking of a China of 40, 50 years ago, not the modern China that is today. Honestly, the social security system, the social services, the disabilities, these are underdeveloped. Absolutely, they still need work, but they've only been at it for 40 years. So these things are constantly improving. And that's the thing. Why would you not be happy if your life now is better than it was 5 years ago, and you know that your children's life is going to be better than yours? Why would you not be happy about that?
Can I just bring up something? The point you made before about China's people saving is very important. My wife worked at a tourist park down towards Phillip Island. I think you know where that is, in Victoria. They've got a lot of Chinese tourists in. They're not all super rich. But one thing is, my wife said when they came into that souvenir shop, they had spending power. It's like they saved their money for that time to spend. So they're not stingy. They save, but not stingy. And
no, they're not. They do save. Chinese people tend to live on less debt. I've noticed. When a Chinese person wants to buy a house, they have to get a mortgage, unless they're from a rich family. When they want to buy a car, they wait 3 years, save the money, then buy the car. It is changing, and it has changed in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. But again, it's changing back with the Evergrande thing. Is going to keep control of spending and borrowing. But it is definitely a case where Chinese people would prefer to save money to do something rather than use their credit card to do it and pay for it later. That's a fact. That's a definite cultural fact, cultural awareness fact.
So now let's get on to the journey, your journey, in regards to with these photos, and in regards to some of the topics we were going to raise as well, as far as poverty I should say more than I don't like using poverty alleviation. I call it more closing the socio-economic gap in China and the work they're doing at that. That's just my personal way I like to say it, because I think China is moving away from what I can see as this abject poverty, like you see in some parts of India where people live on slums and on rubbish tips and cardboard. But they live in rural settings where they're eating, they're housed, they're getting access to education, and they're they're living a good life. So
Mm.
you can start talking about that some more, please, Jezza.
Yeah, well, it brings us very nicely, and that was completely unscripted, but it brought us nicely to the next photo, which is in Guangxi. This is taken just 6 months ago, 7 months ago, back in either March or April. We were on the bike. That's my wife sitting in front of me, having a chat with this guy who's working by the side of the road on all of this bamboo. And it wasn't just one guy, it was a whole village full of this. And she chatted to him, and we asked him a few questions. I couldn't understand a word he said. His language was it was a form of Cantonese, but even my wife said it was difficult to understand what he was saying, and he wasn't going to speak Mandarin to her. Mandarin is, for those people, the most people who watch this would probably know, but Mandarin is spoken throughout China. It's taught in all of the schools, and Cantonese is a local language to southern China. Basically, Guangdong used to be called Canton and Cantonese, but Cantonese is spoken in Hong Kong, in Macau, and also in parts of Jiangxi and in parts of Guangxi, certainly the southern part of Guangxi. They speak Cantonese, and my wife can have conversations with them with some, not necessarily misunderstandings. The best way I can liken it is, for an English person, is, can a Londoner speak to a Geordie? They're both speaking the same language, but they do it differently. And I was born in the northeast of England, so I know exactly what that means. So we had a chat with this guy, and what he does all day, he's got no safety. You can zoom in and have a look at that, but there's no safety features on there. He's just got this saw where he cuts the edges of the rough edges off both ends of the bamboo, and then he measures it. He had a little ring thing where it had small, ever decreasing rings, and he measures the size of the ring, the size of the bamboo diameter, and then it goes into one or the other pile. The big ones go there, which go to scaffolding. The smaller ones go there, which go to somewhere else, and then the ones that are too thin will go to the furniture makers because they can be bent and they're pliable. So this whole village. And we asked him about his life. He said, "Oh, I used to do this with a knife, just every day." Now he's got this. He's got this machine that's doing this, and he's doing them really fast. And he said the great thing about this machine, when they installed it about a year ago, he said, I started to earn more money. I doubled my income from this machine because he can do things faster. And he said, "Well, do you stop for breaks? And is it tiring work?" He said, "No, you just get used to it." And he was chatting to us while he was doing it. And he's got into the system. And I said to my wife, "Be careful you don't distract him too much. There's no safety feature on that saw. And it's a circular saw. And he's got no protection on his hands. He's wearing gloves, but they're not protective gloves. They're just gloves to protect his hands from splinters." So we had a good chat with him. And his livelihood now, he said he works for this guy. He used to work in the city, and he came back. This is where you talked about poverty alleviation. Poverty alleviation has moved on now. It still exists, don't get me wrong. It's very, very big. But it's moved on to rural revitalization, where go on.
To point up what you just said then just triggered something in my mind about in Australia with Indigenous people. This is a very important thing. There's incentives in our government here to move Indigenous people from their homeland in cities. But most of the time that move, they're worse off, right? If our government empowered Indigenous people here in Australia to be culturally engaging and support themselves in their homelands, it would be much more productive, because we're talking about a culture that's probably 40,000 years old, if not more.
Yeah.
That the social network of them being on the homeland is extremely important. So you said something very telling about this gentleman, being more productive and more happy where he was in
where
his
he
home,
is.
Where he is.
Not where he was.
And being pushed to go to the city. Now,
well, it was a very big thing. Farmers would go into the city, but they're totally uneducated. I mean, I don't know this guy's education experience, but I can talk about my in-laws. They're in their 70s now, but so they've retired. But my father-in-law had 3 years teaching, 3 years at school. My mother-in-law had 4.5 years. So she's the educated one of the family. And they're both very intelligent people. There's no doubt they're intelligent, but they're not educated very well. They do speak Mandarin, not well. They do speak Cantonese fluently. That's their local language. They can both read and write. Mum was actually a teacher. She was a mathematics teacher in primary school. And this is a benefit of the Cultural Revolution for them. They never ever had to move. They were living in Guangdong, so they never had to move anywhere because the work came to them rather than they went to the work. My father-in-law did some time in the army. I think he did 6 years military service. And when he came out of the army, he got allocated a job. This was how it worked in those days. Everybody was allocated a job. You went to work in a danhui, which is the work unit. And the work unit provided you with everything you needed in your life. And that's why socially and culturally, Chinese people are very different. This guy gets everything he needs in his village. He'll never be homeless. It's impossible for him to be homeless because his family has a home in the village. And that's what they don't understand in the West. It's very easy in the West to be homeless. You can always go back to your mother and father if they're still alive and they still have a home or a place for you. But in China, if you have a hukou, a household registration, to a village, that village has to look after you. Exactly. The village will look after you. He's not homeless. No one can be homeless. So he's come back there, and I seem to remember it was 180 RMB a day that he earns doing this. And he can, if he wants, work 7 days a week, but he tends not to. He takes a day off every couple of weeks. And this is his job, just cutting and measuring. Now, if he's cutting that many bamboo stalks, some other people are in the hills cutting the bamboo from the crops. I don't know if you call bamboo a crop. It seems to grow wild everywhere. But they're obviously, this is a sustainable industry. Some of these will be made into chopsticks. Some of this will be made into furniture. Some of this will be sent. I don't know if you would have seen this in Macau and certainly in Hong Kong, the bamboo scaffolding. They build high-rise with bamboo scaffolding. It's really impressive to see. And some of this goes to there. And he said he just works for the boss and he gets paid. Some days he'll get 180 RMB a day. And he gets his food provided, and he's got a place to live and stay. He's very happy. His family's he told us he had a kid at school, and obviously that kid's getting an education. He didn't get probably the same opportunities, which is why he has menial labor, or manual labor, menial work. And I think his life is probably a lot better today than it was 5 years ago, particularly if he was working on a construction site in a city centre somewhere.
We have to mention the happiness and the cultural happiness of where he lives. I can only reflect in my experiences with Indigenous communities in Australia, is that the happiness comes from the cultural empowerment of where they live, and it doesn't always come from them moving to the city to fit into our Western life. And if they're supported with that culture and in their community to do, whether it's cultural tourism, whether it's other aspects to financially sustain themselves in their Indigenous community, they're far more happier because they're also supposed to do ceremony with other people within the Indigenous community, and also that kinship support, which is very strong in Australian communities. Yeah,
I don't claim to know very much about the Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal communities. I know very little. I lived in cities while I lived in Australia. But I can tell you that if you allow them to anyone, anywhere, it's not just Aboriginals or Chinese people, if you allow anyone to follow their own culture, they're going to be happier than if you encourage them to do something else. And that's China's way. This guy, I'm not sure if he's Han Chinese or Miao Chinese or Dong. There's a lot of different ethnic minorities in the countryside, particularly in Guangxi. Guangxi is actually the Guangxi Zhuang autonomous region. The Zhuang is the most predominant ethnic minority, so they have autonomy there. So he could very well be one of those as well. I don't know. But the fact is that these people are not just assimilated into the community, they're encouraged to retain their cultural identities and cultural differences. And people will be critical and say, oh, it's just for tourism. It's not. I mean, I'm a cyclist. I don't tour. I'm not a tourist. But I see people when I go through places like this wearing traditional clothes, carrying the babies in a traditional embroidered I don't know what you call that, papoose. I don't know what the name is, sling over the back. Sometimes it's a basket which has been hand woven from bamboo and reeds. And they're doing this. This is their tradition. They've been doing it for years. Now, if you ask this guy, what did your grandfather do? He probably was a bamboo harvester or bamboo cutter or whatever. It's the industry in that village. They're making money. Now, if you look carefully, you can see in the back of the picture there's a high-rise building. So it's not very far from a city, not very far from, or a town. But there is a beautiful river just behind there. You can't see the river in this. And we cycled alongside the river for 30, 40 kilometers. It was beautiful. It was one of the nicest days cycling I can remember. And it was only a few months ago. I can't wait to get back out on the road, to be honest.
Oh, look, the experience I had when I was in Poland with my ex-wife was Polish, and her grandparents lived out on a rural farm. And I went out there and I went on a bike ride around that small town. I think it's Łódź in Poland. I really enjoyed it. The feeling was good. The environment was good. And I felt peaceful, and I felt, I enjoyed the experience. Simple house. They had a very simple house. It was a rendered, very old style, very provincial house. But I got fresh milk there.
Everything's fresh.
A shot of vodka. Enjoyed my time there with the food and near the land. So
was the vodka made at home?
I didn't ask the question, but some bottles that came out in didn't match the bottle, I think.
Yeah. We have the same thing here. Almost everywhere you go, you can get rice wine. What you can do is you can buy very cheaply a very raw rice wine. Some people drink it. It's not good to drink, I can assure you. But what people do in different areas, they have different fruits or different flowers, and they flavor their rice wine with these fruits or these flowers, and it becomes synonymous with that region. And we pretty much did it almost every night that we were in Guangxi. We were 7 weeks in Guangxi, or Western Guangdong and Guangxi. We had a cycling tour, and when we took our time. Some days we only did 20 kilometers to the next town and then stopped. It was a holiday rather than a ride to a destination, which most other rides I've done are. And we stopped at these places and said, "Do you have any local rice wine?" "Oh yeah, we've got this with the whatever flour it is." "Oh, let's try it." And it's like 16 RMB for a small bottle. 16 RMB is $3 locally. And it's 42% proof or 50% proof. The weaker ones are 34%. And they're not bad drinks at all. So we would, have a glass of rice wine and wash it down with a beer, which is less than $1 a bottle. And that's what we'd do. Now, this next
that looks like a distillery.
It looks like, and it's not. It's not. If you look carefully, what you see is a coal-fired water boiler.
Right.
Yeah. And the next picture, you'll see why it's a water boiler, but why it's coal. It's the first time I've ever seen this. This is in Gansu. And what you're seeing here is they come out, they get the coal. I don't know where the coal comes from. We see coal trucks wandering around all the time up in that region. There's a lot of coal. China is doing everything it can to reduce reliance on coal. And we talked about that last week. But there is still a lot of coal in use. And that was the thing I wanted to show here. There are people who still do this. Now, the other way is, and I don't have a picture of it. I went looking for one. I've got one somewhere, but I can't find it. The other way is to have a parabolic curve with a rack on the top, and the rack holds a kettle. And the parabolic curve is mirrored, and it heats the kettle, and the water is permanently hot. And you see that a lot. In fact, you see it so much that I don't bother taking photos of it because it's everywhere. And that's how most people in Gansu heat their water. They don't use gas or electricity or wood or coal. Most people use these parabolic curves because there's a lot of sunshine up there. And you'll see them outside of the houses, outside of shops. They're all over the place. They're like an inverted umbrella, but it's mirrored. And it just has a kettle sitting in the middle, and the kettle's constantly boiling. They're constantly topping it up with cold water. And then they take it out and they top up their flasks. And this is a restaurant. Just behind, you can see that there's a screen going into a restaurant. And I think hopefully the next picture, yes, the next picture is the restaurant, inside the restaurant. And you'll see at the back, the table behind the lady with the yellow apron, there's a load of thermos flasks.
Yes.
They're full of hot water. There's never any restaurant, anywhere you go in China, there's never a shortage of hot water. Kai shui, always available to you. And the reason is they drink a lot of tea. Now, that's during the day when we're riding. That's the kind of place we would stop at. Now, take a look at those two people.
Yes.
What do you notice?
What they're wearing, the clothing.
Yeah, what are they wearing?
It looks like, to me, that they're of the Islamic faith, or it's a Middle Eastern style.
Yeah, they're Muslims, and they don't wear the hijab. They don't wear a burqa. They just wear a scarf. This is traditional Hui Muslim. This is not Uyghur in Xinjiang. These are Huis in Gansu.
Talking about Hui people, what's their background compared to Uyghur? Is there a difference?
They don't have. They have similar culture to Han Chinese in a lot of respects. They use the Mandarin language. They don't have their own language. They're Muslims. I think many of them are converts to Islam, who perhaps the people who came over here 700, 800, 900 years ago and settled into the area would have converted them. But their culture is very, very rich. I just don't know very much about it. Not because I haven't asked, it's just because we travel through there too quickly. We stop in places like this. Now you can see a smile on her face. Yeah. This is how it was when we went anywhere at all. Foreigners walk in. Now, what happens when you walk into a place like this? You are literally in the middle of nowhere. You're maybe 100 kilometers from the nearest city. When you're in Gansu, the distances are quite large. And then what happens? You walk into a place like this and everything stops and people, what's that? They're looking at you because you're getting off a bike, you're pulling your helmet and your scarf and your gloves off and you've covered your face because there's a lot of dust on the road. And they suddenly realize there's a bunch of white people just walked in. And it's like, wow, what's going on here? And sometimes, and I can see why people don't like it, because sometimes the Chinese face, when it's curious, looks a little hostile. It's like, what's going on here? And you walk in and you say something in Chinese, just ni hao or ni men hao, and you come in and say yao shifan, I want to eat, and the smiles, the beams just beam up, and it's like this. And we couldn't get out of this restaurant without signing copies of we left them we had a flag related to our charity ride, and we carried about 100 of these. They're very lightweight, it's like silk, but there's not silk. Silk's too expensive. It was a material that's cheap and like silk, but we had it screen printed with our charity information, what we were doing, and we would sign it and leave it in places like this, and that's what we did. So yeah, it was a really nice. I'd say it's a lovely experience to meet people like this. Now, part of the reason I don't understand much about their culture is because, out of respect, you don't ask. You don't go and say, "Oh, you're Muslim." I mean, if someone said, "Are you a Christian?" I'd say, "No, I'm not." That's it. Simple. But when you start asking that, I think you're starting to step over an imaginary line that's not my business. Obviously, they are Muslims. There's no doubt about that from their clothing. The fact that there's no pork on the menu. But interestingly, you can get beer in a lot of these places. They're much more relaxed about alcohol than they are about pork.
Oh, yeah. Just one thing on that alcohol business. We have to also remember that the Silk Road, when the Romans were going out, were trading in wine going way back with those Western regions. So people did have to have a tradition going way back of drinking alcohol.
There's a very rich...
There's one place in Pakistan where Muslim people actually drink alcohol. And it goes back to those old trade times. And
a lot of Uyghurs, that's what I was just about to say. Uyghurs have a tradition of making wine. The biggest grape growing area in China is Xinjiang, I think. And if it's not Xinjiang, it'll be Ningxia. And we're coming to that in a moment. And there's another picture that I wanted to show you. Let's move on, see if it's the next one. No, it's not the next one. I'll come back to it. That one. Okay. Now, what is that? That, for anybody who can read Chinese, would recognize it. It's the entrance to a winery in Ningxia. It's a place where mostly it's the region Ningxia is a Hui minority autonomous region. So it's not called Ningxia province, it's Ningxia Hui autonomous region. And so the people there are generally speaking Muslim. Not all, probably, I don't know the percentage, but it would be high, fairly high percentage, 50, 60%, I guess. Certainly you see mosques everywhere you go, and Muslims, as those people that we saw, they were in Gansu, not in Ningxia, but Gansu, Ningxia is a small province. It borders Gansu and a lot of Muslims. If you've traveled through China at all, you would have seen the Lanzhou noodle shops. They're very famous, where they hand pull the noodles and they stretch in. Have you seen these things? They're doing this inside the shop or sometimes outside the shop. And they're all Muslims as well. So the whole region has a lot of Muslims, and they're traveling all over China. There is no restriction on their movement whatsoever. There's no restriction on their religion. There's no restriction on anything they want to do. They can buy the Quran. I tested this. So you can buy the Quran online in several different languages. These are just really, really nice people living very happily, very friendly. And here's the real interesting thing. If Gansu and Ningxia are allowed to be Muslim, why is Xinjiang not? And obviously the answer is that's bull. Xinjiang is allowed to be Muslim, and they do practice Islam. They do go to their mosques, and there are plenty of mosques. There's no shortage of mosques anyway. But the reason I wanted to show this one is because this is actually a winery in Ningxia, and it's quite a famous winery too. And I can assure you, their wine is pretty high quality, very good quality, in fact.
That region produce good wine, and you could just imagine in the ancient trade days of the Silk Road when Marco Polo and others were going out there. I'm sure there would have been some exchanging grapes for wine, or because Rome had been wine for a long time.
That's also interesting. That picture in Ningxia is very, very close to a place called Jiangye, where Marco Polo spent 2 years. So maybe there's a history. There's a story that Marco Polo took spaghetti to China, or maybe Marco Polo took noodles back to Italy, but neither of which are true. It's a very well-known fact that noodles have been made in China for thousands of years. Also, they do know from the Mount Vesuvius eruption in Pompeii that there were spaghetti and noodles and pastas and things in Italy before Marco Polo ever went. It was a natural progression. This is something I wanted to show you. This picture, we're talking about what's going on. This is in Harbin, in fact, not in, but just outside of the city center of Harbin. The road's reduced to one lane, and it's a really terrible lane. If you want to travel in China, and in 2014, I traveled across China on the worst roads imaginable because we're not allowed on the freeways. China, people think that China is developed because they see Shanghai or Guangzhou or Shenzhen, and those cities, without a doubt, are incredibly well developed, very, very well developed. But when you get outside of those cities, even in Guangdong, you can find roads like this. We're not allowed to travel on the freeways. China has built the most incredible freeways to get from one city to another city, but they're all toll roads. Bikes aren't allowed on the toll roads. Trucks, of course, are allowed on the toll roads, but they have to pay. So if they're not in a hurry to go somewhere, they don't use the toll road, they use these roads, and they screw the roads up. Also, Harbin, this area right now is probably about 0 degrees. When it comes winter, this is the place where they have the ice city. It's freezing, -20, -25, even colder than that. And so what happens is they'll build good roads, but the winter comes and it really screws around. The older roads all look like this once you get out of the city. Not all, a lot. Now, one of the things I've found in China, and it's incredible how they're doing this, they're doing these fantastic freeways between cities. So anyone traveling by bus, traveling by private car, any goods going by truck, go onto these toll roads, and they are fantastic. There is no doubt that China has in my opinion, now there is no doubt, it's not just my opinion, China has the best road system in Asia, much better than Australia, and certainly 10 times better than the UK with its motorway system. China's road system between cities is fantastic. But if you have to use the smaller, minor roads, they are slowly, very slowly working on all of these roads. I mean, we're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of kilometers of roads. Between 2014 and 2019, I saw fantastic improvements, but they're a long, long way from finished yet. So there's a negative side to this development. There's not a negative side. The development is happening, but it's happening for people on bikes like us. It's happening a bit slower than we'd like it to, because these things play havoc with your tires. They play havoc with your safety. I mean, that's a single lane road now, and we've got to approach that, either go through that puddle or get into the other lane. What if there's something coming behind us? What if there's something in front of us? We're in the wrong lane, and it's not safe.
Well,
so
one point I want to be about that is that I see roads like that in Australia, in between country towns. There's big shows on TV where trucks, these large trucks we have, road trains, have a lot of trailers, travel through dirt and dusty roads that get flooded through floods in Central Australia and other areas. So no country's really immune to these type of roads. So
the difference between Australia is and certainly the UK is that they don't seem very keen on changing it. America, the same thing. I read somewhere in America that they've had no bridge maintenance for 50 years, no serious bridge maintenance for 50 years. Now, if they're not maintaining and replacing their bridges, China's building bridges faster than they're building side roads. They're really doing very, very well at that. And there's the difference. China, being a still developing country, is slowly but surely changing all of this. The West, which is already developed, is allowing it to deteriorate. And there's the difference. As the West is up there and China is down here still, except for Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, those kinds of cities. Let's forget about them. The real China outside of those. The West is up here in terms of its transportation and things. China is down here. But the West's not changing very much, but China is doing this. And this is why people are a little bit unhappy about China. They're a little afraid that China is going to be too good a place. And in all honesty, there is that social issue of, as China improves, are they likely to destroy the culture that we have here? I don't know. And it's a balancing act. They're doing their best not to.
I don't see it in Australia. I mean, the Chinese community here in Australia, we integrate well and we retain what we call our culture in Australia. So I don't see signs of that when we have a high Chinese population in a lot of areas. Yeah. They may have their signs up in Chinese and English, which if you go to Hong Kong, they go up in English. And the street signs in China, a lot of them in sort of Pinyin or English and Chinese. Not many people realise that when you travel through on roads in China, they don't have the street signs just in Chinese. They have them in English.
Most of them. That's correct. You can read. I see Zhongshan and I recognize it. I recognize most cities and town names as I'm coming towards them. But it's handy if I'm traveling around China and I don't know the name of the town I'm going to. It's handy to see it in Pinyin, and you will on the road signs.
English.
We have to keep an eye on the time. We don't want to bore people too much. Well, this is kind of a quirky picture. Can you guess what that is?
It looks like they're growing brooms to me.
Growing brooms. That's what we thought when we stopped there. This whole village was dedicated to noodles. That's noodles drying. Uh-huh. That's what it is. They pack the noodles into same size, and then they tie them at the bottom and spread them, and then pop them there to dry. And then they can sell dried noodles, or they can store dried noodles. And this is mass production, traditional style. And I found this was really cute because it wasn't just one place. It was one house after the next, after the next, after the next. And it was obviously something this village specializes in. And it's in Guangxi as well. And I think Guangxi is quite famous for its breakfast noodles. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is where a lot of them come from. It's one particular village that does huge amounts of mass production. But of course, when you talk about feeding 1.4 billion people, you need factory mass production, not this kind of mass production. That would feed if that was if that was a private house, and I think it is, that would feed that private house for 5 years, I guess, rather than just. So obviously they're producing it to sell, and that's again part of poverty alleviation, part of rural revitalization. I'm certain that we could put that picture into Taobao and find somebody on Taobao who sells that and have it delivered to our home tomorrow. That's really the beauty of rural revitalization. Yeah. When we stopped at some of the places we stopped at, and we'd buy some drinks at the side of the road made with fresh fruit from the trees. My wife would always we did this half a dozen times, would always say, can you do deliveries? And she would send some back to her parents in Guangdong. And that's rural revitalization at its finest. One of the most important things, the lifeblood of the country, is the express delivery services. They are fantastic. They're brilliant. And I think you can pick up whatever you want in China fresh from the farm, direct from the farm, just by going online and finding the farm that supplies them. But we travel through the countryside and we stop at the side of the road and say to a guy, can you send this? Yep, sure. And it's delivered the next day. We had some melon delivered from Hami, which is in Xinjiang, and we had some melon delivered to Guangdong. 36 hours it took. That's 5,000. Nearly 5,000.
Farm gate to gate.
Well, it wasn't actually farm gate. This guy was street selling in the city center, but it was that morning. His stock had been on the vine on the ground. He takes his stock off the vine, puts it on his trolley, brings it into town, and sells it at the side of the road. And we finished dinner, and we just said, "Oh, look, we're in Hami. These are called Hami melon. This city is famous for this particular melon. Let's get some." And we're chatting to the guy, and my wife, I can't remember, I think it might have been my idea. Should we send some back to your mum and dad? And from there on, every time we stopped, we said, "Can you do delivery?" "Yeah, we can." And we sent kiwi fruits, and we sent passion fruit, and we sent other fruits back to mum and dad from wherever we were. We're traveling through an area, side of the road, they're selling something, and off it goes. It's as easy as that. So it is actually really interesting. And this is another aspect. Oh, coffee's been delivered. Thank you. Another aspect of being in China that I find so wonderful. This is my wife with her very, very short hair. She had her hair cut really short for this bike ride, actually on this bike ride. And what she got there, the picture's a little green. It's because I'm standing in a bus shelter, and the bus shelter had a green shade across the top. Can you see what she's got?
It seems like I'm trying to focus in on it. It just seems like a bun or a fruit inside there.
It's a bag of apples. We were in an area in Shanxi. There's two Shanxis. There's Shanxi with a double A and Shanxi with a single A. The characters are very, very different. But the Shanxi with the double A is where we were. And there's a lot of apples grown in that area. It's not the most famous area in China for apples. Yantai and that area in Shandong is much more famous for its apples. And I have cycled through there, and I have been given free apples. But in this occasion, I got a photograph. These two guys we stopped at the bus stop for a rest, and they just pulled up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" "We're riding to Zhongshan." "Riding to Zhongshan, you're going to need some apples." And they gave us a bag of apples, just like that. They'd been to market. They'd sold a lot of their stock. You can't see it inside their little tricycle there. They've got some other apples. But yeah, this guy just jumps off the back, hands Anne a bag of apples, and says, "Yeah, these will be. You'll need these because you're riding a long way." That happens all the time. It really sincerely does happen all the time. People just stop and give you things. I remember riding one day. I'm riding along the road, and it's not a busy road. It's a fairly quiet road, going up a hill, and it's hard work. I'm going up this hill, and a car pulls up next to me, and the window wound down. And I thought, what's going on here? And there's a lady in the car hanging out the back window, handing me a can of Red Bull. And she she didn't speak any English. My Chinese is quite limited, but she just hands me this Red Bull and they drive past. Now, Anne was behind me, and so was Bevan, the guy who rides with us. And they both got given a can as well. So these are just driven past us. And Red Bull is for energy, gives you wings. They just saw us long hills sometimes, 100-kilometer hills. You're going up into the plateau around Gansu or Shanxi. You're often climbing hills. You're just as often coming down them as well, but climbing takes longer. And these beautiful people just pull up next to you. They're still driving. They're driving at the same speed as you and just hand you stuff to drink or something to eat. And you're going up a hill and you can't not take it. It'd be rude. So you just, oh, thank you, sheshini. And they go, jayo. And then they're gone. That's what they do. Really nice. Jayo literally means add oil. It's like a, come on, go. Yeah. So it became the catch cry. Jayo Zhongguo was the catch cry of the Beijing Olympics. It literally means add oil.
Yeah, I heard Jayo because, my football team, as you know.
Oh, yes, of course. If you're involved in any sport, you hear Jayo. Yeah. So we're coming towards the end. I wanted to keep this about 45 minutes.
That's right.
But I wanted to show you this picture, and probably I'll come back to it in a second. Let me just show this picture first. Now we'll come back to the other one. What we're seeing here is poverty alleviation in action without realizing it. Now, what you can see in the front are the old houses. Now, those old houses would have had, historically, would have had farms at the back. Now, here's the social side of this, where there's a social impact. The farms at the back have now had multi-story buildings built onto them. But look at the blue door. That's somebody's private house. Look outside the blue door, and you can see the corn is drying in the fields. They dry their corn, turn it into powder. It becomes corn flour. The corn is drying. This is what happens throughout rural China. You see fruits, rice, vegetables, anything drying, even fish. In southern China, it's fish. And it's not a nice smell sometimes. You cycle past something and there's a load of fish drying in the sun. And this is what happens. But what they used to have was a farm out the back, and they lived in the front. Now what's happening, we're in a transition phase. This is what will happen. They will eventually pull down all of those what look like temporary buildings at the front, but are not. That's their traditional homes. They're adobe huts, effectively. That's where they used to live. They will eventually pull them down, and they will turn that into farmland. But we're seeing a transition right now. It may not turn into farmland. It may turn into grassland or something like that, but it will turn into something. They won't leave it like this. You can see that everything here is very new behind. This is poverty alleviation at work, as you see it when you're cycling through China. And you see this. Go on.
Just one thing from that photo. Our good friend Jason, who sends up BBC News.
Oh, Jason Lightfoot, yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to have this picture because he'd be saying, "Here we are."
He would probably do it, but if the BBC wrote about this, they'd have a different story. The Communist Party and the government officials live in the high rise, and the farmers have to live in the bottom. But Jason would do that far better than I would, and he'd do it with a better accent too. Now, before they had the adobe huts, that's where they lived. That's home. This is the Lost Plain. The Lost Plain is, we're on a road on the Lost Plain, and so the road has been taken down to bedrock level for stability and stuff like that. It's a very well engineered road. But in the past, what you'd find is that these doors would probably have been at ground level. And they've taken it down to build the road and the service area at the side of the road. But these doors would have been at or near ground level, or there would have been steps up to them. That's where people used to live. And in 2014, this picture was taken in 2019. In 2014, all of these had doors. A lot of them had washing hanging outside of them. And some of them, can you believe this? Some of them even had little parabolic satellite dishes for their TV. That's where they lived. So they had power in there. I don't think they had much water going in there, but they would have had electric cable coming in there to provide them with television, lighting. They possibly had communications in there. I don't know. But that was home in 2014. That was home. And then we look at what's happening here in 2019. This is the kind of thing that you see. Now, if that doesn't tell you something good is happening in China, I don't know what does.
Exactly. And, to talk, going back to that picture of the old houses they lived in off the side of the road, well, you're talking about houses that are underground. You can go right now to Kubapedi in Central Australia.
Yeah.
Where people are in underground houses carved out of the mines underneath the earth. So people are still living in that type of environment. And, they have satellite dishes as well.
Well, we tend to think of it as a form of poverty, and it's not. No. It's not a form of poverty, although living in what we're seeing now for people like you and I would be better, obviously. I wouldn't want to live in a cave. But, hey, I know about Kubapedi, and I know it's got a hotel there, and I wouldn't mind trying it. I wouldn't mind experiencing that, but it's not where I'd want to live. Now, think about... If we go back to that picture and think about the people who actually did live there, what's their life like now? And that's what worries me. That it does worry me a little bit. And I'd love to be able to talk to someone who did live there and ask the question, do you feel better off? Now, obviously, they in terms of their health, it's better for them to live in a house. In terms of convenience, they've got electricity, water, gas, whatever they need. In terms of society and social structure, are they really better off? And that is where I have the little balancing act trouble. I don't really know. I just hope they are. I hope they feel better off. I know that most of them feel that the government's doing good things, because everybody I've ever asked says the same thing. It's better than it used to be. Everywhere in China is better than it used to be. For them, and people talk about taking away the social culture of places like Kashgar in Xinjiang, where they pulled down all the adobe mud huts and then they built apartments, and people now have apartments to live in. And there was no cost associated with that for the people. They got free apartments. But is their social life better? I know their health life is. I know their convenience and those comfort factors, they will be better. But, for the old guy who used to play cards on the street corner, is he better off in his 2-bedroom apartment on the 20th floor now? That's what I really don't know. And, I mean, the fact is, he's better off socially, economically. He's better off. But is he better off societally? If I could use that word, his society is different now.
If he's got contact with the people that used to live in those houses you're showing, he's got still those same networks and those cultural networks, it may be okay.
So we go out. We Westerners, when we want to have a party or something, we invite people to our house, and they come to our house and drink our beer and eat our food and then leave. Now, that's the way we do things. When they do things in a lot of these cultures, they go out into the public parks. Parks are huge in China. And I don't mean huge in terms of their size. They are. A lot of them are. Parks are huge in terms of society, where people go to meet and mingle and meet their friends and drink tea and play cards and dance. And it's not like our society. Things are different. Now, we can look at that and say, well, they're better off in those high-rise buildings. But are they culturally better off, societally better off? And that to me is a little bit of a concern. And it's one of the things that I don't know, but I really hope that China and the Chinese government, when they say we're doing good things, are really asking the people, will this be good for you? And I can be honest, if I was 70 years old, and I'm not that far short of it, I wouldn't want them moving me out of the apartment that I'm in into a high-rise building. I wouldn't want that, because I like my life now. Yeah.
I think the main thing is for all elderly people at that age is still to have their social links with the people they had those links with before.
Correct.
Those social activities and some of those cultural activities they did. If that is there, then I think that fills that gap of what you're talking about.
For sure. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying I don't know. And it's something I would like to research deeper, because a lot of people are criticizing me on Twitter and things like that. because they say you don't understand the social implications. I say, well, I do understand the social implications, but I don't know what the social implications are. But do you understand the social implications living in Canberra or living in Newcastle and England or wherever you live? Do you understand them living where you live? Because probably not, and probably not as well as I do. And I openly admit I don't understand. So let's move on. This is the last picture. No, this is the second last picture.
Right.
I wanted to show this picture. This is the wife and I on day one, leaving Urumqi, and we stopped at this place because I said to my wife, "What's all this about? What's all this writing on the wall? It's a private house. It's somebody's private house." And she said, "Oh, it just means that if all the minority people live socially together, we'll have a harmonious society." Well, that makes sense. And I said, "Do you think the owners of the house wanted it there?" She said, "We don't know." But it's all over China. Everywhere you go in China, you'll find that written on walls, written on posters, written on factory gates, stuff about harmonious society and living together. And people say, well, it's just Chinese propaganda. Well, what is propaganda if that's the way you live and that is the way Chinese government lives? Is that propaganda or are they just telling you facts? And you're forcing me to believe it by brainwashing me into believing. Well, yeah, as my wife just said, it's a good brainwash for those people who think that this is just the government with slogans.
Social messages in Australia about not drinking and driving, or how to be diversity and the inclusion of multicultural people.
So that kind of thing, the diversity and multicultural, when inclusion, diversity, multiculturalism, these are the kind of things that China has been doing since since history, but it's since the Cultural Revolution. And when things settled down, the Cultural Revolution was all about slogans as well, but that was very political. Now, you could say that this is political, but isn't this good advice? If all the people can live together, we'll have a harmonious society. I would say that's pretty good advice. Why can't other people think like that?
Exactly.
And why is it so nasty? Now, here's the other thing I wanted to point out. Can you see the languages?
Yes, the other script.
Do you know what languages they are?
You can tell me that.
Well, the bottom one, the bigger characters are Mandarin. The top characters are Uyghur script.
That's
now,
right.
We didn't just stop at this one because it had Uyghur script on it. We'd ridden past about 20 or 30 of them, and I said, hey, let's stop and get a picture of these before we get out of town and don't see it again. And then we got to the next town and we saw it again. So it wasn't really like this is a one-off. We stopped there because I wanted to get a picture of the Uyghur script and the Mandarin together. And I'd asked my wife as we're riding along, what do these all say? What are they? And she said, oh, it's just normal thing that the government says. Everybody should be happy. Everybody should live civilized. And so that's what this is. It's community slogans, yes. Is it propaganda or is it a way of life? Culturally, this is the way China lives. Ethnic minorities are not assimilated into the major group, the Han. They are embraced. They are encouraged. They're actually incentivized to keep their culture. The government pays them to keep their culture because the government knows this is part of tradition of Chinese. As China modernizes, and if you go to Shenzhen people will hate me for this. There's no culture. No. Shenzhen people love the city, and I accept that. I don't live there, and I don't particularly like it. But then I didn't like Sydney, and I didn't like London, and there's a lot of cities I don't like. Shenzhen, to me, has absolutely no culture, no feeling. I love living in the city where I live because I can still find cultural buildings, cultural differences. I can still find what I call real China. You can't find it in Shenzhen.
Those people from Shenyang can always travel the countryside and go on a cultural holiday.
They can, and they're actually not far away from it. So I think we got there. This is the one last picture I wanted to show you, and then we'll wind it up on this picture. I call this picture the road to nowhere, and It literally is. You are on one side of the road here, you have Kazakhstan, and the other side of the road, you have China. And it is literally right on the border. We're in a place called Wenchuan, which means hot springs. And the road was 70 kilometers like this. Now, you'd say, what a boring ride. But no, it wasn't, because the landscape kept changing on both sides. We had snow-capped mountains on one side and desert mountains on the other side. And it just kept changing. And the Wenchuan is a hot springs area inside of a mountainous region. But the road, as we got towards the city, we're about 10 kilometers outside of the city, and the road started to go like this. And it was a little up and a little down. It was just the most perfect day's riding. We did 75 kilometers on roads like this. And it was actually on the 2014 ride, this was our last day of riding. When we got to the end of this, we were at the border of Kazakhstan, or we were pretty much at the border of Kazakhstan. We had support vehicles with us from Urumqi to the border, and my wife and my co-rider's wife had joined us, and we were now on holiday. So this was the last day of riding in 2014. And I honestly thought at the time it would be my last big riding day. I'd be done by now. Because if someone said to me, would you do it all again? No way. It is just too hard. And now here we are. I've done it five times now, I think. And these bike rides are just becoming part of my life. So that's what I wanted to show you. That's 12 pictures. We've spent an hour talking about them. And I'm trying to show a little bit of China as China really is. And what I want is feedback from the people who look at this and say, if you've got questions, put them in there. Put them in the comments, ask the questions. And if you'd like us to do this again, I want to do this regularly, and I'll pick 12 pictures from different things and have a different story to tell about every picture tells a story, as who said that? It was Moody Blues, I think, made an album called Every Picture Tells a Story. I think it was them.
So we'll wrap up now, because I've got to go to the sunset and do some stuff.
Okay.
So that's great. Cool. That's a wonderful journey. Thank you, Jezza.
No problem, Dazza.
Keep this going. And yes, please, people, make a comment, subscribe, support us with this program, and we will show you some more stuff. And in closing, I would also love to see a comical edge on this with Jason Lightfoot taking this journey and giving his BSB impression of it. That would be a bit of a fun thing to see.
We can send it to Jason and let him know.
Yep, definitely. All right.
Cool.
Thanks again.
See you, Dazza. Bye-bye.
Bye.